Hi, everybody. Welcome to our next episode of Raise the Bar in Real Estate. I am so excited to be introducing our next guest, Leah Burton. She is such a powerhouse in the title and escrow world. If you don't know who Leah is, she is the branch manager and as senior escrow officer at WFG in Bethany. And fun fact about Leah is that she actually was born in Bethany. So talk about an expert. She has two kids, is married, and I consider her just a real great resource and also friend. So thank you, Leah, for joining us today. It's so great to have you.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, I've had some transactions with Leah, and she's definitely a pro. And we were just discussing, we thought it would be great to kind of get into the market. I think that is something that everybody right now has top of mind, what's going on. And Leah sees a lot, right? She sees a big scope of different types of transaction, has a pulse on the market. So we want to dig into that today. But first, Leah, I think it's always great to hear somebody's story. So, what inspired you to get into real estate, and how did your really career take you to where you are today?
Yeah. So I actually completely fell into it by accident. I was playing on a co-ed softball team, and one of the guys on the team was like, "Hey, my mom's opening up an escrow office and she needs a receptionist." And I was like, "What's escrow?" And
We were
so
just
I
talking
met
about
his
that.
mom. Yeah, I met his mom. We instantly hit it off. And she's been one of my biggest mentors in the industry. So,
Oh, that's great. And how
yeah.
many years ago was that?
About 20-ish years ago.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
I one thing we were just talking about is that sorry, my bracelet's banging. Is that everybody has a different style and their secret sauce in how they approach the business and their transactions. Kind of what has been your unique approach and with working clients and managing transactions?
Yeah, I consider myself a pretty empathetic person. And I think I just kind of lead with that. It's all about the client and their situation and their journey. Either it's happy or it's sad. So I really just try to lean into that and kind of understand where the client's coming from. I
Mhm.
feel like we can give the best service that way if we really, listen to their story and hear what their needs are. We can be excited with them or more reserved, depending on what the transaction is.
Yeah, that's really fair because, for some people, it isn't a happy situation. Maybe their parents have to leave a home after, 30 plus years, or it's a first time home buyer. I can imagine that's a really different frame of mind. So,
Definitely. Yeah, those are the really fun, exciting ones, and then there are tears shed in the signing when it's somebody's house and they, you know, their kids were born and raised there and or it's been in the family for 100 plus years, it's all
yeah.
sorts of situations that we see.
Yeah, well, it's so great that you're on the other side of that transaction because I think if somebody was to approach it just really as a business transaction, it would just not be a very rewarding experience. So I definitely can appreciate that about you that you're very empathetic. So you were very excited with my transaction.
That was a fun one.
Um, so, like I said, we want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the market. So, what's your take, kind of just macro level, what's going on with the real estate market nationally? And then we'll unpack a little bit what's happened here in Portland. What do you think is going to happen for the rest of the year? And I know nobody
Yeah.
has a crystal ball and there's so many variables, but just from your expertise, give us your take.
Yeah, I mean, I find it hard to predict, year after year for the last 3 or 4 years. I feel like the predictions have been off, right? We were all waiting for rates to drop and business to increase, and it just, the last 3 years have been rough. But I do feel like things are happening. I feel like clients are getting more used to what the interest rates are, and there's always the life changes too. I mean, you can't just sit on the sidelines and not do things. Kids, families have kids, they grow, they get relocated for their work, things are happening. So I think this year will be okay. I don't think it'll be amazing unless interest rates drop. I feel like if interest rates come down a little bit, we'll see a lot more activity. Um, But I feel like the market is improving. If you look at the last 3 years, this year is definitely better than it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely it started out really strong. I think, this spring everybody got a little bit nervous with tariffs and I think some big corporations, which we'll talk about in a second in Portland, had maybe not, some uh negative stock impacts, so which put everybody on hold. So yeah, in terms of micro trends, like how do you take this national picture and what do you see what's happening in the Portland that really sets us apart?
I feel like we are in a nice little pocket here. We've always been really lucky to have the Nike and the Intel sectors here. I feel like that always helps our market.
Mhm.
And then, with the Amazon and, there's some businesses that are here locally that I think really help our market be a little bit more stable than other areas of the country. So I feel like we're lucky to have that.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about your primary client base? Like who do you mostly serve? Do you see? Or is it
I
vary?
don't think it's not one specific. We see all different clients. There's not, I would say it's very diverse.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of that, like who right now do you see as being who's buying? You said like life changes, job
Yeah.
changes, babies happen, people have to move. So are you seeing a certain demographic or who you see, or do you see that that hasn't really shifted from previous years?
No, I think it's definitely different in this market. There's a lot of estate sales. So somebody's passed away. So lots of probated estates, unprobated estates that are selling. Um, lots of uh, lots of people that are downsizing or moving into a retirement community. That's a pretty popular client at the moment in this market. We are seeing some younger buyers. We're seeing family members gifting money.
Yes, yeah.
We're seeing a lot of that right now where family members are helping that younger generation become homeowners. And what's interesting is a lot of increase in manufactured homes. I feel like
Oh.
that's an affordability piece, and that's something that we're seeing a lot more of in this market than we did in previous markets.
That's interesting because that was going to be my next question is like what certain property types are you seeing? Because one thing we're noticing is that this multi-generational living situation is getting really popular, whether that's an ADU or like, parents living with kids to help with childcare. Um, and we're also seeing, multiplexes because of the use, the end use. So in your mind, is that something you're seeing as well, or could you talk a little bit about the property types and how they've shifted?
Yeah, definitely. We are seeing, families come together and buying property together. Um, I have seen some multiplexes where someone purchases one of the units to occupy and then is renting the other units. I feel like that's such a smart buy. If you can get into that, that seems to be, at least in my opinion, a really smart way to purchase a property.
Yeah.
But yeah, lots of families coming together and living together, buying a place together. That is a popular scenario that we're seeing.
Yeah. And on the opposite side, do you see any property types declining, like price points, or what's kind of been some, insights you have around where the market's shifting and price points and property types?
Yeah, I feel like, anything 550 and below is that affordability factor. That seems to be a pretty hot market. And then, as you get into that sort of zone between like 6 and 9, those are selling, but I think, we aren't seeing them as get those multiple offers and go as quickly as the lower price point. And then like a million and above, yeah, those are selling, but they're taking a while to get offers. I feel like, those sit longer than anything just because, that that specific buyer, that pool is a lot smaller. But the 550 and under, I feel like that's that affordability piece. When you look at a payment with the interest rates the way they are today, if you can get something under six, that seems to be the most popular buy.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And if you start backing out what that mortgage, payment is, it's still, it's still a pretty significant payment.
It's a large chunk of change. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've seen some assumables take place
Oh,
where a
interesting.
buyer assumes the seller's rate.
Oh,
I'm surprised that we haven't seen more of that in this market. Because when it actually does come together, it's pretty amazing what that payment is. We all look at that and it's like, oh, wow, you're paying, 2 grand with taxes and insurance included. Like, who wouldn't love that payment? So those are pretty cool when they come together. But I'm surprised that we haven't seen more of that in this market.
can you explain a little bit to the audience what is an assumable loan?
Yeah.
I know it's a more of a lending question, but as you're
Yeah.
seeing it, I think it's good to kind of explain it.
Yeah. So let's say a seller has a 3% interest rate and they want to sell their home. A buyer, if they can qualify with that seller's lender,
Mhm.
and if they're able to qualify, they could potentially assume that loan, which means they get to keep that loan with the 3% interest rate. So it's a pretty sweet deal. But the buyer would then obviously have to figure out a way to pay the difference between what the seller owes, that loan that they're assuming, versus what the sales price is. So they'd have to figure out a way to pay the seller their equity. And so that I think is probably one of the reasons why we don't see more is, that can be a large sum. It
Yeah.
could be like 100,000, 150,000, 200,000. But, we have seen some gifting come into play there where that interest rate can be kept. And so it's pretty cool when it does come together.
Yeah, that is very remarkable.
Yeah.
And so if there is a $500,000 purchase price, the loan is 300, the buyer would have to come to the table with $200,000, which is the delta. And talk a little bit about gifting. Is there a threshold for what a buyer can get gifted?
But that's probably a better question for a lender because it just kind of all depends on what sort of loan program they're going with and what the underwriting requirements are. But on our end here, there isn't. So yeah, we've seen lots of gifts, especially in this market.
And just for my clarification, if it's a gift, is that person on title or on the deed at all?
Usually not. They can be. There is, that is an option if they wanted to be on title as a vested owner, they could be. But in most cases, they're just gifting the money and they're not an owner when we finalize.
Got it. Got it. So I think this is something you touched on is the creativity that's coming through. And I think that's where your experience really is beneficial because, a few years ago, we haven't seen assumable or maybe seller carry or lease options. I mean, again, we don't need to unpack all those, but I think we're definitely seeing much more creative approaches. And that's why it's really important to work with uh, an escrow officer who knows how to kind of see that transaction through and keep the deal together because it can get pretty sticky.
Yeah, I've worked in lots of different kinds of markets over the years, and so yeah, there was a period where it was all about the short sales or all about the seller financing. As we came out of the downturn market, back in 08, 09, as we came out of that, there was a lot of creative financing and ways to try to get deals done. And so I think we're sort of in that space again where, people are doing more creative financing, with the seller financing or the options to purchase, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it's great to have somebody, in your shoes knows how to execute it for sure. So make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are
Thank you.
dotted.
I think it really matters to make sure that you have an agent too that knows, what they're doing in those sort of situations.
Yeah, no,
It's important to
absolutely.
have a team, an advisor.
Yeah, because one of the things we're seeing definitely is more concessions. We're seeing it contingent upon the seller's house selling or buyer's house selling. It's just there's a lot more complexity. So people are just trying to make it work. Um, so speaking of like how you keep a transaction on track, like what do you feel is most important to keep a transaction from sticking and being set up for success and also keeping your clients kind of uh yeah on just feeling calm about it and confident.
Yeah, so I think it's really all about the communication. I've learned over the years, just in listening to clients, a lot of times we hear the same question asked over and over. There's important pieces that most buyers and sellers don't know or aren't aware of in this industry. They don't do it every day like we do. And so just kind of learning and listening and try over here, we try to create the approach where we put that into our process where we're trying to give them that information and answer that question before they ask it, just to kind of, try to keep it as organized as possible here, try to keep the communication clear. But I think it really does come down to your team and who you're working with. If you have an agent that is organized and communicates with escrow, you have a lender that's going to close on time and keep all parties, notified as to what's going on. Like it really does take a village.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to make sure that your team is strong.
And in your mind, I really see it as kind of a trifecta, the lender, the title, the realtor. In your mind, like who really needs to drive that so that the seller or the buyer feels like somebody's kind of spearheading it all?
Yeah. Yeah, I always feel like the agents, they work together and keep everything going per the contract guidelines. It's
Mhm.
always great to have a lender that's proactive, that's notifying everybody. I've seen some escrow officers take the approach where we are here, we're the third, we're the disinterested, we're the neutral party, we're just going to sit and wait and see how things play out. But I really try to take the approach of let's be proactive. My team, we can check in, we can keep all parties on a email and see how things are coming along. We can make sure that the closing disclosure's gone out to the buyer and we're going to hit our closing date on time. So I think there are little pieces that are, little processes that we put into place to try to help keep everything moving along as it should.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you kind of spoke to earlier, that's really your strength is I think there's no such thing as over communicating as being a bad thing. And I think even if you might tell somebody one time, they might not be in the right frame of mind to really be ready to absorb that information because it might
Sure.
be too overwhelming. And then it's like when it's applicable, it's like you have to remind them that this is what you need to do or this is what you need to sign. That's what I find. That's how my brain works sometimes.
For sure.
Don't
I
tell me
mean,
that right now. I'm not ready to absorb that piece.
there's so many parties to a transaction and it's so foreign to somebody that doesn't know what we do. A lot of times clients will call in and they'll call me the loan officer or, they don't really understand what our roles are or what we do, how it all comes together, which is totally fine. Just
Yeah.
call and ask the questions. We want to make sure that everybody understands or, at least kind of knows what direction we're working towards so I think it's just really important that we all communicate. There's so many moving parts and people involved and so many emotions for the clients too. It's an emotional, life-changing event to buy or sell.
Yeah. And hats off to the team to kind of be able to, be able to ride that and navigate it. Because it's one of the biggest transactions probably somebody goes through in their life. And especially if you only do it two or three times in your lifetime, it's
Yeah.
pretty significant. So, what advice do you have to buyers and sellers to, you know, to keep things on track? Do you have any advice you would bestow on people?
Yeah. I love to speak with the clients over the phone. There are a lot of emails, throughout a transaction, but I feel like the best advice is just pick up the phone, ask me questions. I always tell clients there's no stupid question. A lot of times they'll call and say, "Oh, I have a dumb question." There is no dumb question. Like, we do this every day. You don't. We're happy. We're here to serve you. We're here to answer your questions. So really, it's just, the communication piece. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great advice. Um, Again, if you haven't done a transaction in 20 years, things have really changed.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much fraud too, and scams that are always evolving every day. And so that's why I really just like, let's talk by phone. Let's answer your questions. Come and see me in person. We're here in the office. Whatever communication, the client prefers, but I love in person and on the phone.
Yeah. Yeah, and you got to think if somebody's in their 80s, this high tech world of like signing over or depositing your money through an app, like that's so hard to comprehend to exchange money that way. And so, yeah, do you have any advice for those type of sellers or buyers of how to like maybe not be intimidated with that, or how do you meet them where they're at?
Yeah. So that's actually a tip that I usually tell agents, like when a new transaction comes over, let me know. Is your client tech savvy or do they like in person? Like if I know that right off the bat, I can directly, change our process here to just fit your client's needs, and
Yeah.
and I tell clients that all the time on the phone too. If you want to come in and see me in person, come in, I'll walk you through the paperwork up front, what we need. And then there's other clients that are tech savvy and are super, busy with their work schedules. And for that type of client, that type of need, WFG has an amazing portal called My Home where they can do
Mhm.
everything, on the portal. And so I feel like we really try to fit each individual client's needs.
I think that is so important because to be able to flex like that is pretty valuable because you're right, there is a very low tech generation, which we have to honor that. And because it is a big, intimidation, or just they don't have the skill set. I barely have the skill set, but it's a new frontier for them. So meeting and signing checks and receiving checks, that is their comfort zone. Whereas a millennial or Gen Z, you might not even ever see them in the office, right? You could even maybe send a notary for them to sign. So I think that's really important for our listeners to know. It's like, don't feel intimidated or apologetic, whatever your style is, because that's your style and that's okay. And everybody can accommodate that.
Exactly.
I think that's a really powerful takeaway for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so let me ask you, like, okay, what's life after real estate, or is this what you think you're going to be doing forever?
Um, I love what I do. I absolutely love my job. So I think this is what I'll do forever. Um, if I was to ever imagine another career, I think maybe like working with kids, kids
Uh,
bring me joy. So something like that would be fun. But I really feel like I just love what I do. I love my job. I love helping people. It's such an emotional, important step. It's such a big financial step to buy or sell. So it's really rewarding to be a part of that journey and just make sure it's seamless, for the client.
yeah, yeah, it's definitely, I don't think everybody's cut out for that for sure. So you definitely have that strength. Um, So you fell into real estate as we talked about, which we're all fortunate you did. And let me ask you, what piece of advice would you give your younger self today?
Mm. I would probably tell myself not to sweat the small stuff and really just try to enjoy life. Um, and to also pick my battles. It's really all about my mindset. And I've,
Mm.
coming into my 40s, I'm learning that, I can be negative or I can be positive, and it's really all about my mindset and, what I focus on.
I love that. Yeah, and that is definitely a journey. I mean, continue work on your mindset, right?
Yeah.
Good for you. That's great. Well, how can people get a hold of you if they have any questions? What's the best way to stay in touch with you, Leah?
Yeah. So email, phone call, come and see me in the office. Our office is actually moving upstairs. We're expanding this week.
Wow,
Yeah.
this
So you'll catch
week,
us on the second
congratulations.
floor. Yeah, we're doubling our size. So, but I'm an in-person kind of gal, so that works
Great.
great if you want to come see me.
I love it. I love it. And we everybody, this will be posted on Instagram and social, so you can also reach out to Leah that way as well. So Leah, you keep crushing it. I mean, what a great career you have, and yeah, and you've had, and I know you have quite a runway yet. So we're excited to have you in the business, and thank you for being on the show today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks.